Welcome back to episode 3 of Singing at Brick Walls. I'm Holden.
I am Dan.
And today we are talking about Alone at St. Luke's.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones.
They're all my favorites.
I'm probably going to say that about every song.
Yeah, I was going to say, and
this one's one of my favorite ones.
I would never pick a favorite child of your songs. And this is a really fun one, not least of all because the song is really fun. And sort of boisterous and rowdy, but also because there's some lore behind this song. And I would love for you to regale everybody, our listeners back at home, with some of these stories behind how this song came to be and how you lived some of this song.
Okay, well, so that's kind of the double-edged sword, and we talked about it a little bit with Paying Bills to the End of the World. But there's this double-edged sword of this living in reality, right? Where it's cool and it's interesting that the project exists on the same plane of reality as this one, and that everything that happens in character is canon. And that in some ways allows us to, and we'll talk about it later with Spitting in the Wind, but it allows us to change the trajectory of the story by changing what happens in real life. Very cool. Super fun. Definitely a unique aspect of this band. It cuts both ways. And we saw it with the pandemic, but it really happened with Alone at St. Luke's, which is, so basically what I need to always kind of be doing is marrying what canonically happens in reality with narrative.
Right.
And one of the times that was a big challenge was this song, because the song takes place on a tour that the Roaring Twenties did at the UK in May of 2022, right? Yeah. Yes. I forget because it's newly 24. I'm like, what year?
Oh my God, it's 2024.
I know.
Oh.
In May of 2022. And
It's a leap year.
24 is a leap year.
Yeah. Last year to Colin, it was next year is a leap year.
Exactly.
So now it's a leap
when
year.
it comes out. So don't confuse that when you listen to the record and think that 2025 has. Anyway. So we did this tour and it was so fun. It was the first time the band was back together and playing and back on tour post-pandemic. And it came to a screeching halt when our drummer got COVID. Obviously, that presents narrative challenges. It also presented this incredible logistical challenge because it was at the time where in order to board a plane back to America, you had to have a negative COVID test to prove that you were COVID negative. And so now we understood, okay, well, Nick has COVID. He will not be leaving. Yeah. So I guess let's get the rest of us tested and see, do we all have COVID? And everyone else tested negative. And so it was like, okay, well, I think we need to send everybody home, right? Because we can't play full band shows without Nick. Mm-hmm. And we'll get everybody out of here.
And how many shows did you have left at that point?
We still had 3 of the 7, right? We played Bristol, we played Southampton, we played Nottingham, we played London. Mm-hmm. And we still had Leeds, Manchester, and Glasgow left. Mm-hmm. I think that's it. There might have been one more. Anyway, so everyone tested negative. And I was like, well, if I'm negative, I'm going to play solo, which is a bummer because the idea was that it was full band. Sad. Everybody else, if you're negative, go home. And so we got everyone tested. They were all negative. We put them all on flights literally the next morning. And they all ended up being positive later. I was, myself and the driver, the only ones that avoided getting COVID. I don't want to say I'm built different.
I was going to say, you are though. Like every single time everybody gets COVID. When we first met, we were both exposed to COVID and you did not.
I didn't get it. Yeah.
Immune king.
No, I have gotten it once, but I only, whatever. We don't have to go into COVID too much. But the point is I was really diligent about it, right? So every morning I would test before we would go to the venue at the hotel. The driver and I would test, Nikki. And then we would get to the venue, sound check, and before I would go on stage, I would test again to make sure I wasn't spraying it into the crowd. And I just stayed negative. Everybody else went home and got very sick, which was a bummer. Yeah. Probably 2 days after they landed. So it went from this really fun tour where we're all together and having a blast, and then it really record scratch stopped. And it became incredibly lonely where, because even Nikki left. Nikki, I was like, get them to the airport. Nick is in a hotel room in Leeds. I told Nikki, get the rest of the band down to London and I'll figure it out. And so I was like literally hitching rides. I stayed at this hotel that when we booked it, it was the only place we could book. It was not a hotel. It was like,
what does that mean?
I don't know.
I'm still processing the experience.
I got dropped off at the end of a really long driveway by one of the other bands. The Nightmares dropped me off. I walked down this super long, super dark driveway. When I got there, no one was there. And there's just a phone number.
And you were alone.
I'm alone. You call a phone number and they give you a key code to get a key out. I never saw another person there. I just went to like a bedroom in like a manor and stayed there and got out the next morning and
kind of cool.
Got a taxi to like a mall and waited there
until
I got picked up. Me too. And checkout was like super early and Nikki was like, I'm not going to make it back until like 3. I'm like, I'm fucked. I got to get out of here.
Oh no.
But yeah, it went from this really fun thing to this really harsh stop.
Yeah.
And I ended up playing the rest of it solo. And the last show is at St. Luke's in Glasgow, which is a really old, I wish I should have looked up how old the church is.
We'll fact check and post.
Yeah, Joe, you're over
Leave
there.
it in
Can
the
you
show
fact
notes.
check how old St. Luke's is in Glasgow?
Oh, I love that we have
a
an
producer.
in-studio producer.
We have an in-studio producer checking on this for me. So it's this really old church that got turned into this really cool fucking punk venue with a bar called the Winged Ox on the side. And it just felt like drenched in irony that Aaron is playing a solo show at this church. And so it became this thing where we have to now retrofit this real life occurrence to the narrative.
Yeah.
And how can we do that? And narratively, Aaron has been trying to abstain from drinking because in the past 8 years, he's only been drinking out of sadness, which is not, as he recognizes, a good, healthy way to drink.
Right.
But when the band's back together and it feels celebratory and fun, fuck it.
Yeah.
If we're here and it's fun, we might as well be
drinking.
And so the first half of this song has that real like double time country feel.
Yeah. I love the percussion on this song. It like sounds like not like this sort of like street fireworks, like those little like pop things. Like there's this kind of like boisterous,
things.
like
Yeah.
rambunctious, like, yeah, we're like spinning curses and hopping fences. And
yeah,
like,
and it's
pop,
exactly.
pop, pop.
It feels like degenerate in a way.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like I briefly I showed this song and got some notes on it from John Allison Weiss, who's really good at that double time country stuff. And it's like the Frank Turnery style of that kind of music where it's like punk country colliding. And so it was like, okay, well, let's do that. And we'll have him having this really good, debaucherous, degenerate, fun time. We're drinking because it's a celebration.
Yeah.
And then the band comes home and I wanted it to be exactly the same. It's the same tempo even. Same chords, same tempo, down an octave without the band. And you get the isolation of just Aaron. And the lyrics are the same, but the drinking you can tell has turned.
Yeah.
Do we have a year on St. Luke's? 1836. So a church from 1836, now almost 200-year-old church that I got to play in.
Sick.
And just the irony felt so thick to be at this church. And it just felt like the right thing to do sonically, lyrically, to draw that sharp dichotomy and to show you very quickly how fast the drinking can go from fun celebratory drinking to sad, alone, morose drinking.
Yeah.
And how it can become a problem again very quickly.
And I mean, you can feel like the floor drops out from under him. Like the sort of, I mean, literally in that the rhythm section drops out and it's just him with his guitar. And there's this just like sense of like not only kind of desolation and loneliness, but also kind of impending doom. And I think one of the other ways that this sort of music mirrors the story in this song as a sort of storytelling technique is that you use repetition sort of so efficiently. There's the 3 times that you say, "What did I expect?"
Yeah.
And the first time, the shorebird sounds the same here, which I also want to talk about because we talked a little bit about like Paris syndrome and like all of these things about like going to a place and it not being what you expected. But then, there's like mouse shit on the carpet, and there's like, that's a little bit darker. We're sort of, the first thing, the shortbreads sound the same here. That's like small disappointment, just kind of surprise, whatever. The stakes are sort of low. The next time it's like things are a little gross, but it's like I laugh and the wine spills on the bed. There's a sort of like, we're laughing it off. Like it's getting a little bit edgier. It's getting a little bit darker, but we're still partying.
Yeah, it's gross, but what did we expect? It's a 15-pound a night hotel room.
And then it's cold and wet and lonesome. And it's just like this total kind of collapse of this, like the anaphora, the what did I expect? Like,
and it's the self-fulfilling prophecy of Aaron's entire existence, right? He always expects it to go wrong. And I think I'm glad that you touched on the repetition, because we talked a little bit in the first episode on In Lieu of Flowers about the economy of space and the economy of words in songwriting. And there's a reason that it's my favorite medium, and it's that we, like I said, we have to fit everything into this little space. And how do we do that? And so if I'm going to waste that space, or potentially waste that space on a repetitive line, spend that space, I need it to not be a waste.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm going to repeat that line 3 times, the stakes are going to change every time. It's going to get more dire. And so it's a really purposeful decision, and something I try to take seriously in my songwriting is, if we're going to do something like that, it has to be for a reason. It has to serve a bigger purpose in the song.
Absolutely. I mean, and it not only ferries the narrative across, because it's just like how we are tracking the story elements changing, the sort of his space changing, the environment changing, the fact of his going from being surrounded by other people to being alone. It's like setting narrative architecture, but it also is reinforcing the fact on a kind of macro level that Aaron is losing hope, like that there is this kind of return to and
it's so sharp.
It's so sharp.
Because it literally, from day to day, it goes from the most jubilant that maybe you ever hear him to, oh, of course, it just turns back to shit. Anytime I get something good, it's going to turn back to shit. And it's mirrored in the music, not just in the fact that it stops, but we spent a lot of time making that stop as sharp and painful as possible. Like, spent a lot of time being like, that delay trail needs to get cut. It needs to fucking stop. Like, I need it to feel like someone flipped a big power switch and you got silence at that moment, so that you could feel that really, really sharp dichotomy. But I forgot that I wanted to touch on, you said talking about shorebirds.
Yeah.
And obviously a narrative return. Yeah. Right. But I think it also speaks to one of the things we talked about in an earlier episode, where the small detailed choices can tell you a lot about a person or a story or any narrative element. And I had never left the country before I started touring in a band. I had been on 2 planes. I once went to Disney World. Otherwise, and I once went to North Carolina, and otherwise I had never been outside of the tri-state. And so I remember when I landed in England the first time in 2007, get off the plane, you go through customs, we got right on the Heathrow Express, we took it to Paddington, and I walked up the stairs and stood there and thought, and I know it sounds silly, but I thought, it's real, right? It's really here. There's an actual place on the other side of an ocean. I'm not in the Truman Show. Because up to that point, though obviously I believed it to be real, I had no evidence of the reality of other places. And so I think that's like a big thing with people who don't have, because a lot of my friends when I was younger went all over the place, to the Olympics, to Japan, I had a friend from the Czech Republic that would go back home there. I had friends that went to the Netherlands and to London, and we didn't have the means for that. That wasn't a part of my childhood, which is fine. A great childhood, right? It's fine.
You're like, I'm not complaining. There's
I don't
no
mean to say
resentment.
it. I don't, because I'm sure my mom is watching. I don't mean to say it in a way that is
don't worry,
through
Mom.
any resentment.
We loved the tri-state
It was great.
area.
Yo, I love Ocean City, New Jersey.
Hell
I
yeah.
do. I love it. But the point I'm trying to make is, when you are, and Aaron is written from a family like that. He doesn't have the means to go places. And so I think it's the things that we have these expectations of what it will feel like, how foreign it will feel. And you mentioned Paris syndrome, and we talked about that on the phone, was like, there's an entire psychological syndrome
Phenomenon,
about people that get so excited to go to Paris because of the romance, and when they get there and see that it is a city, and so it will be in some ways dirty and grimy in some places. It's a city.
Yeah.
It's how it's going to be. They get so depressed.
Yeah.
And so it's this understanding that like you had a different expectation about what seagulls would sound like internationally speaks to what kind of household Aaron grew up in. I think another thing we talked about was like when I was younger, I assumed that like dog barks sounded different in countries where
like had different accents.
Yeah,
like you go to England and then the dog would like have a posh accent.
Yeah,
or like
what does
accent.
a dog bark sound like in Mexico? Like, does the dog bark in Spanish somehow? I just
yeah.
And so I think it speaks to like the like ways that socioeconomic status can make us seem naive.
Yeah.
And then that sharp realization, it's like, yeah, of course they sound like seagulls. They're seagulls.
What did I expect?
What did I expect?
But I also think there's something about, I mean, of course, the kind of recurrence of shorebirds as a motif in all of Aaron's songs, like they've always felt to me kind of like, they're like psychopomps in his universe. They're like the birds, you know, that circle to take you to the underworld. And they're always sort of like
they're omnipresent.
His, you know, there's something about all of the times that he's by the ocean, which he usually is. He's always on a coast. That is like this place of like change and liminality and promise, but also it's like the end of something. It's like the edge of the land. He's always, I always feel like Aaron is like on the edge.
Always close to the edge. And I think it's maybe not something that I even meant to do, but it's something that like kind of subconsciously happens where this song is on the edge of something.
Yeah.
Right. And you literally falls off of that edge towards the end of the song.
Yeah.
And to see the shorebirds there again is it's really interesting that you drew that.
And also just like because I understand that part of that line is about disappointment, but there's also, I think, a comfort in like the shorebirds sound the same here. It's like this is a sound, there's like a familiarity even when I'm overseas, even when I'm abroad. And there's all of this, I think something that we also talked about on the phone with Aaron, and I think with this song in particular, is like wherever you go, there you are. He can't escape, he can't outrun his demons. He can't outdrive his demons. He can't even outfly them. And no matter where he goes, no matter how he gets there, they're still there. And I think it's like, what did I expect? That's really like each of the repetitions of that line. I think what kind of undergirds it thematically is him actually just saying like, I'm still me. What did I expect?
Yeah.
Here we are again. And I think that it's like the perfect way to set up what comes next in the record, because we've sort of talked a lot about the kind of like interstitial structure and like the beats of his journey and the different types of failure or loss he needs to endure in order to have sort of raised his ego or in order to be prepared to atone or to make amends for what he's done. And I think getting to this place of self-effacement and of you know, being back alone with his losses and saying, well, of course I was going to end up here. I might as well keep drinking. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the inevitability that he has built into his brain. Yeah. Right. It's not, to him, it's not a bump in the road. Right. It's like, of course that was going to happen. Of course it's going to end badly because everything ends badly. So it's, again, it's self-fulfilling for him.
Yeah. And I also think, I mean, so much of this record, I mean, we've sort of talked about this, but even the chorus, there's this kind of like polysemy happening there. There's like this plurality of meanings that when the sonics change, you realize that the words can be read differently. Even like spitting curses, hopping fences. It's like spitting curses, hopping fences. Like we're having fun.
It's
like
fun. We're being
la,
bad.
la, la,
yeah.
la. But then it's also like, you know, spitting curses, hopping fences, like, you know, we're burning out like true romantics.
Yeah, especially that line. Burning out like true romantics can really be both sides of that coin.
Where it's like the kind of glamorized debauchery versus when the lights come on and you have to look at yourself and your actions and what you're doing. It's like you realize that what seems like jubilation is actually like a controllessness, is like being out of control.
Out of control, spinning out of control very quickly, yeah. Another thing I wanted to mention with this song, we talked about before, is like, there are some things with the ability to stitch reality into it, sometimes there are moments that I think are just like kind of fun to do. And I talk about this project a lot, like pro wrestling, and there's like this this term that I've heard wrestlers use a lot where he said like they're just trying to pop the boys, which is like someone on the mic, in the ring, on television, whatever, almost like winking an inside joke to get that's more for the people backstage than it is for the audience. And being able to find ways to do that, like there really was mouse shit in that hotel room. And
hell yeah.
You know, Nina called and was like, hey, did your hotel room have a bunch of mouse shit in it? Because mine does. And I just think that like being able to do that kind of stuff too, because we talked about like the joy of the project is doing it with these people that have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that like that's so true of so many like bands. And so yeah, just finding a way that like I can put a lyric in that when the band hears it the first time, they're gonna really like it. There's a big one in Roman Candles that I won't give away, but that is another real thing that happened to us and our vehicle.
And I think it adds like, even when we talked about sort of inside jokes as being this thing that is ostensibly impenetrable to the audience. If you don't know what it really means or what it's concealing or the story behind it, you're only sort of looking at the surface of the reference or of the joke or of the detail. But especially when you see Aaron West live, like with the 20s, it's like, you know that it's so real. Like the camaraderie and like the fun that's being had is experienced even just as that. So like when a musician or an artist embeds something that is private or lived for the band into the music, even if we're not getting the joke, we can tell the fact of the joke. And like, I think that's the cool thing about any kind of like referential work, is that even if you can't decode the reference, you're still experiencing it or you're perceiving it as a type of intimacy. And I think it enhances what makes the 20s so great and what makes this project feel so exciting. I mean, like, there's no show like an Aaron West show. Like, it's just, there's so much fun and heart in it. And I think you can experience, especially with this record, that like, even though so much of the story is fictional, so much of it came from like the fact of you guys finding mouse shit on the carpet of the hotel room when you were on tour.
Yeah.
And that like that those fingerprints are on it and like that human touch is on it, especially when you're working with fiction, when you're working with a kind of contrived personage that isn't necessarily you. These like little lived moments give it texture that makes it feel so real and so potent.
And I think it's so necessary in a song that's supposed to feel so fun at the jump.
Yeah.
Right? The beginning of the song is supposed to feel, and I think it's such a jubilant chorus. And I think it's really driven home again, like the horn line in the chorus, I think is so fun.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, I think it's the best example on the record of using the music to like really enforce the shifting emotions, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and I also, we haven't talked about this, something that struck me the first time I heard the record, because, you know, I'd read the lyrics to this song, but when I heard the record, I wasn't exactly sure what the song would sound like. And the fact that you call it Alone at St. Luke's, even though you're only alone at St. Luke's at the end, it's almost like kind of giving it away or like winking at the fact that like we are teetering on the precipice of something, that this song is an edge.
It was the hardest song to title on the record. It was the last one titled.
Cool.
And we just couldn't find something that really made sense. And I think that was kind of where we landed, was like, what if it's telling you something before you get to it? Yeah. There's like a little bit of like a harbinger of what's to come.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and the fact that so much of it is this kind of like unfettered bacchanalia and carousing. It's like Alone at St. Luke's. You're picturing this kind of penitent figure like in church. You don't know necessarily what it contains, but that it's like he's not really alone. He's certainly not in church, you know, like they're like drinking in the streets and like running wild. And I like that contradiction. And I think it plays with the dynamics and the kind of like high highs and low lows. And I think that it brings out this sort of something that's interesting in that, like, this record feels so communal. We talked about, with In Lieu of Flowers, like how big it is, how kind of familial and full it feels. But that calling this other song that's also about camaraderie and also about togetherness, Alone at St. Luke's, speaks to like the private experience of his struggles with addiction and the fact that, like, even when he is surrounded by these other people, there is a slight difference to his experience.
Yeah.
Because he's struggling with alcohol, when they're all partying, he is having a private experience. He is still alone in that. And he knows.
He knows. Even though he's lying directly to himself, right?
Yeah.
He's saying, this is celebratory drinking. This is fun. This is going to be okay. But there's a part of him that knows it's not going to be okay.
No.
So.
And I think, and that's where the song ends.
Yeah. And then we'll get to Whiplash next week.
Yeah. And then there's Whiplash. And get ready. Be excited.
Oh, we have a special guest next week.
Oh, yeah. Can we reveal it?
Let's hold it.
Let's hold it. You guys, there's a special guest next week for Whiplash, and the song is beautiful.
Next episode, right? These aren't so
I'm like,
weekly.
when are they?
They're not like weekly. They're
weekly,
like,
colloquially.
Weekly. They're
We're using weekly as an expression.
Per single, per song release.
So whenever it comes out, get excited for Whiplash.
And
this has been Alone at St. Luke's. I've been Holden.
I'm Dan, and this is Singing at Brick Walls.
Aaron West podcast.
And In Lieu of Flowers exploration.
Yep. See you next time.